Hello, this is Professor Joseph Holbrook. I'm teaching Latin American Civilization, LAH 2020, and today we're going to talk about Chapter 2 from Martin and Wasserman's textbook and get a little background on the Native Americans that lived in the New World before the arrival of the Europeans. Of course, it was new for the Europeans, but not so new for the Native Americans. So we have here a picture of what's known as the central part of Mesoamerica in the 15th century. This is Lake Texcoco, which is the site of present-day Mexico City. Mesoamerica refers to an area that includes most of historic Mexico and Central America. It literally means Central America, but in modern terms we include Mexico and North America. But Mesoamerica would basically be focused on the central part of Mexico, historically. It was a home to many political and linguistic groups in the year 1400. Some of these groups were Tarascans, Mixtec Indians, Zapotec Indians, as well as Aztecs or Mishka. I had the privilege of visiting some Mixtec Indian villages several years ago, as well as spending some time in some Aztec Indian villages in Mexico in the state of Puebla. So you see here a closer picture of the Valley of Mexico. At the time, 1400 AD, it was a lake, and in the center part of the lower part of the lake you see Tenochtitlan and Tlatelolco. Then over here is the village of Texcoco, very important locations in history. The rise of the Mishka. The Mishka were a tribe that was also known in history as Aztecs. Of course, Mexico takes its name from the Mishka, which was the ruling empire in the central part of Mexico at the time of the arrival of the Spaniards. In 1370s, the Mishka migrated from the northern part of Mexico, or perhaps the southwest part of modern United States, and they migrated to the center of the heartland of Mexico and settled on an island in Lake Texcoco. They named this place Tenochtitlan, which literally meant in the Nahuatl language, the place next to the prickly pear cactus. In 1428, Ixcoatl formed the Triple Alliance with the other villages of Texcoco and Tlacopan. This became a very powerful alliance, and from 1440 to 1460, King Montezuma I expanded the Mishka Empire over a good bit of the central part of Mexico. They did suffer some defeats, such as in 1479 they were defeated by the Tarascans. The Mishka religion and state. The Mishka's primary god, Huitzilopochtli, which meant the hummingbird on the left. An odd name, is it not? The hummingbird on the left led them from Aztlan, which was a quasi-mythical place in the northern Mexico or Texas or southwestern United States. That's the mythical homeland of the Aztec people. This god, Huitzilopochtli, demanded massive human sacrifices in order that the sun would keep rising every day. In 1487, they dedicated a temple that they built to Huitzilopochtli and offered massive human sacrifices to the gods. There was another god known as the feathered serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, which was a much more benevolent or benign god who refused human sacrifices, but rather requested sacrifices of butterflies. Tlaloc was the god of rain and had been around for many centuries before the arrival of the Aztecs. Ometeotl was another god. Tezcatlipoca and Xochiquetzal were other gods and goddesses of the Aztec pantheon. This shows a picture of Mesoamerica, a good part of central Mexico and southern Mexico and northern Guatemala. And that was the extent of the Aztec Empire. In the everyday life of the Mishka, they had a hierarchical social structure somewhat similar to some of the ancient civilizations in Mesopotamia and Egypt, in the sense that the top 5 to 10% of the population were nobility and controlled much of the resources. The center part of the hierarchy was the Masehualtin, or the commoners, and they were broken down into capuli, which could be loosely translated clans, of a dozen or so family households who shared common lands. There were also peasant farmers, artisans, Pochteca traders, and at the bottom of the social structure were slaves. Usually they were criminals or indebted. They were not hereditary. It was not hereditary slavery. It was not racial-based slavery, as would come to dominate later in such places as Brazil, Cuba, the southern United States, Haiti, which was a very different kind of slavery that was racial, hereditary, and driven by large plantation economy. These slaves usually worked as servants of households or of the nobility. You see there some Aztec records. On the southern part of the American hemisphere, we have a totally different empire known as the Incas. It was actually a much larger empire than the Aztecs. In fact, it was even larger than the Ottoman Empire, centered in Turkey with much of the Muslim Middle East, or the Ming China. The Incan Empire was known as Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. It had its capital at Cuzco at the 9,000 feet altitude level, with 150,000 residents in 1530. The total empire had a population of 12 million people, which was actually pretty massive, considering that they did not have any modern communications or transportation, that all of their transportation and communication was done by humans on foot. The Incas spoke Quechua. Quechua is still a living language that is spoken in many parts of rural Peru. One can study Quechua with a FLAS fellowship, Foreign Language Area Studies, which you can Google and find out more about from the Department of Education. I studied Portuguese with the FLAS fellowship. I think Creole is another language that's approved for study. Hold on one second. Their empire included also Aymara speakers, another Indian language around the lake Titicaca, which is in modern-day Brazil. They used a combination of diplomacy and military domination. They drafted warriors from subjugated provinces. The Incas relocated entire populations. Unlike the Romans, but similar to the Assyrian Empire, they would uproot an entire population and move it to a new location in order to terrorize and subjugate the populations and control them. They practiced reciprocal obligations between the rulers and the ruled. The Incas also sent out Quechua-speaking colonists to populate the outflung parts of the empire. This is somewhat similar to the Greeks under Alexander the Great, who established Greek-speaking colonies all over the known world. Incas constructed 20,000 miles of roads, better quality than anything in Europe at the time. They also provided inns along the way of the roads to shelter travelers and messengers who were traveling on the roads. This makes one think of the Silk Road under the Mongols, which was well run and administrated and also had inns along the way. In the everyday life of the Incas, they farmed the steep slopes of the Andes. The basic unit of Indian society was the Ayaylu, an extended family or tribal group, somewhat similar to the Capuli of the Aztecs. Each Ayaylu controlled land at various altitudes. They divided chores along gender lines, but Incan gender structure stressed complementarity between the sexes. Equal access to the resources. A particular social role was the Yanaconas, which were outcasts from the Ayllu structure. The Aztecs and the Incas compared. Neither were great cultural innovators. There were profound differences in the way commodities circulated and exchanged in their economies, however. The Incas had a state-directed economy, which strategically placed warehouses. You might compare this to state socialism. The Mesoamericans, on the other hand, had a fully developed market economy. Both had more in common with the European empires of the time than they had with the simpler societies that were located in the Caribbean, with whom Christopher Columbus had his first contact when he arrived in the Americas. Thank you, and we'll continue in a moment with the part 2 of chapter 2.